欢迎大家收看世界日报举办的2021年秋季教育线上讲座。我们邀请到 Admisson Masters 升学顾问 Richard Vincent Kim 为大家演讲通往前20大学之路。
Hello, everyone. My name is Vincent Kim. I will be talking with you guys about some post-pandemic college admission strategies. Unfortunately, I can't speak Chinese, so hopefully you guys can follow along with me in this English presentation. All right. I probably will have a little bit of time at the end of my presentation. So if you guys have questions, feel free to comment them, and I'll try to get to them at the end of this presentation. All right. Okay, without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys, and let me present this. All right. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about this new landscape of college admissions. We know that COVID has kind of thrown a wrench into our plans, and I want to make sure that we're clear on some strategies for ways that we can try to address this new post-pandemic world. I'm going to try to focus primarily on some of the more selective colleges in the nation. All right. So some background on myself, my name again is Vincent. I've been at Admisson Masters for a little over a decade now, a really long time. But some about my educational background, I earned my bachelor's in political science and education studies from UCLA. I earned my master's in higher education administration from the University of Pennsylvania. And while I was at UPenn, I kind of wore a lot of different hats. So I was a grad assistant at the Penn Law Admissions and Financial Aid Office. I was reading applications for Yale, and I was also a program coordinator for a program that you guys have probably never heard of. It's called the Carey JD MBA program, which is a dual degree program between the Wharton School of Business and the Penn Law School. So I was in and out of both admissions offices. I was reading applications at Yale, and I'm hoping to kind of share some of my knowledge about the admissions process during this presentation today. I want to actually start with this quote that I found from the president and CEO of the Common Application. Her name is Jenny Rickard, and I think she did a really good job of encapsulating kind of what admissions is looking like in this post-pandemic world. And so she mentioned that the process of college admissions, by and large, has not been disrupted, but it's the way of getting there that has been disrupted. And what she means by this is we still have an application process. The way that college admissions works, by and large, is the same. But the things we have to do now, for example, regarding preparing for your standardized tests, the activities you can get involved in, the way that you incorporate these pieces into your application, these things have changed because of the pandemic. And today I'm going to talk about 5 particular strategies, 5 particular categories that you guys need to, I guess, be aware of in terms of how we can be better prepared for your admissions and your applications once you get to that point of your high school career. But really quickly, some other numbers that I just want to make sure we're clear on. So there are some kind of standout numbers that stood out to me within this past year. So we've had our first, I guess, COVID class be accepted to colleges, and we've learned a lot about how college admissions has kind of changed within this 1 year alone. So for example, there's been a 20% increase in the amount of first generation applicants. So if you, your parents or your grandparents, if they've never been to college, it looks like there's more of you guys applying to these schools, and you're also being accepted in larger numbers. In addition to that, about 70% of students still submitted test scores to these colleges, even if they were test optional. We'll talk about that in a few slides, but you guys probably know that many colleges nowadays are test optional, meaning you do not need to submit test scores if you want to apply. And yet many students still are submitting test scores. So it's still very competitive in this regard. And I'll talk about this more, and again, in a few slides here. 90% of the top 30 colleges have actually seen an increase in their level of competition. Things are getting, unfortunately, more difficult. And I know that this is an already stressful time for students, but we just want to make sure that we're clear about ways in which we can improve our chances by kind of shifting the way that we look at admissions and doing the things we can now to make ourselves the strongest applicants possible. So these selective colleges, they're finding themselves having to be even more selective about their applicants because the amount of students who are applying is only increasing, right? I talked about first generation students specifically. Again, if your parents or your grandparents, if they did not attend college, in most cases, these students wouldn't typically have really strong test scores. And it was a huge barrier of entry for them to get into these colleges. But they might have had good GPAs. They might have had really strong activities. It was just their test scores kind of brought them down. Now that these students are not being expected to submit test scores, they're being accepted in larger numbers. And that's because, again, they don't need to submit their test scores to be competitive applicants. They can get in with their GPA, their activities, their recommendations alone. This is the new world that we're living in. It's a little bit tougher, again, if you're not a first generation student, and also if you're not an international student. So if you're a domestic student applying for these colleges, unfortunately, things might get a little bit tougher too. All right, not impossible, but again, we just want to make sure we're clear about the reality of college admissions today. So I'm going to talk about 5 particular areas that we can try and work to make yourselves, again, a stronger applicant for colleges. So I'm going to start by discussing standardized testing, which I know a lot of you guys might have questions about. Then we'll talk about your activities, things that you can be doing now, even while the pandemic is happening. I know we're kind of shifting away from it. We have the Delta variant coming out, so there's a lot kind of going on, but we want to make sure we're clear about the activities we should still be getting involved in. Then we'll talk about essays, we'll talk about courses and grades, and then I also want to talk with you guys about demonstrated interest, which I'm finding a lot of students don't know too much about. We'll start with standardized testing. Most colleges, as you guys know, are now test optional. Test optional simply means that these colleges will still review your scores if you submit them, but you don't have to submit them. So if you don't have a good score, or if you just decided not to take the exam to focus on other things, you can still apply. And a lot of these colleges, I think pretty much all of these schools, are essentially saying that it won't put you at a disadvantage if you don't submit test scores, even if you could have, right? Even for these test optional schools. We'll talk about in the next slide whether or not you should. Then there are some colleges like the UCs that are test blind, meaning they don't look at any of your scores. Even if you have really good scores, the UCs won't look at those. So your SAT, ACT scores are not considered whatsoever for these colleges. Instead, for schools like the UCs, that means that other things will be weighted a lot more heavily. So your grades, which we'll talk about, and your courses, these will matter a lot more. Things like your activities, your leadership, those are going to matter more. Your essays will matter more. So we want to make sure, again, that we are, for these test blind colleges, demonstrating strengths in other areas, in other ways, because this will be a lot more important for these test blind colleges. For test optional colleges, I 100% recommend that you still prepare for your standardized tests, even though these colleges will say that it doesn't put you at a disadvantage if you do not submit an SAT or ACT score. Unfortunately, the reality is, if you have a really good SAT, ACT score and you submit it to these test optional schools, admissions officers have no choice but to consider them, and it can help you. If you have a good test score, of course, it can help your chances of getting in. So ultimately, my recommendation is definitely study, especially for the younger students here. If you're a freshman or a sophomore, I recommend that you take the you study for the SAT or ACT now. Do your best to get the best score possible, and then hopefully you'll have a solid score by the time you're a senior, so you can submit that to your colleges. There are some situations, I think, where it might be a good idea to not do it. For me, that would be if you've already, like, you're a junior or maybe even a senior now, and you've already been studying so much for the SAT or ACT, and your score is just not improving. You know, you've studied for over a year, you've been doing Khan Academy, you've been doing, SAT prep, you've been working with a tutor, and yet your score is just plateauing. It's just not getting higher. In those situations, I would recommend considering maybe just cutting your losses, because the more time you're investing into studying for the SAT or ACT, the less time you're spending on other parts of your application, right? Maybe instead of spending hundreds of hours studying for the SAT, you could have used that to focus on your activities. Maybe you could have created a club. Maybe you could have created a nonprofit organization. Maybe you could have focused that on building your relationship with your teachers or doing better in your classes. At a certain point, it might be a good idea to cut our losses and not really have to focus on your tests if you're not going to have a good score to show for it at the end of the day. But for most students, especially for, I know a lot of you Asian students, and again, the younger ones, I would definitely recommend that you still study as much as you can, because having a good test score can help you. In addition to the SAT, ACT, though, there were these exams called the SAT 2 subject tests. And I don't know how familiar maybe you guys are with this, but as of June 2021, That was the last domestic administration of these exams. So the SAT-2s were this 1 hour subject test. You could take the SAT-2 history, SAT-2 English literature, SAT-2 math, biophysics. These exams no longer exist. And the purpose of these, again, was to demonstrate your proficiency in these subjects. That's kind of awesome for you guys now, because you don't have to worry about taking these exams anymore. And there were some schools like MIT in the past required that you required 2 SAT-2 subject test scores. Some schools like Georgetown recommended that you have 3 SAT-2 subject test scores. You don't have to do these anymore, which again is really awesome. However, and there's always a however, that means that AP exams are now going to be weighted more heavily. So in the eyes of admissions, AP exams and SAT-2s, when I was reading applications, we really saw them very similarly, right? They both showed us how good are you at certain subjects. Well, now that the SAT-2s are gone, it's really just your AP scores that can demonstrate to us how proficient you are in these subjects on a national, international level. And so for better or worse, your AP exams will be viewed more heavily. And so if you have a really good AP score, it could really help you more for the admissions process. If you have a really bad AP score, it could hurt you more for the admissions process. So we want to make sure that you are trying your best on these APs, because after your SAT and ACT, your APs are probably now the most important exams that you can be taking. Fortunately, for a lot of your colleges, for most of your schools, you don't have to report bad AP scores. So if you guys aren't familiar, a 3 is passing. It's pretty good. I recommend you submit all your 3s. Even to Ivy League colleges, I'd recommend you submit your 3s. 4s and 5s are what we want. Those are really, really good scores. 1s and 2s are fails on these AP exams. I would recommend, obviously, that you don't report these. But if you don't report these 1s and 2s, it's better than, it's better to not show to your colleges. But if you don't report them and we see that you took the class, colleges will wonder, well, we see that this student took AP physics. How come he didn't show us an AP score in his application? Did he fail? Did he just did not take it because he wasn't prepared? But we'd rather have them question these things as opposed to know that you failed the exam. All right. So again, APs will be weighted more heavily. So those are the main things regarding standardized testing. I'm going to talk about activities next. And there's just a few things I want to make sure we're clear on regarding activities. I'm very much aware, and I'm sure every admissions officer is very much aware, that because of COVID, so many things either stopped or were just very much hampered, right? Your activities, your sports, your extracurriculars, we understand that because of COVID, you probably couldn't do these things as much. So later on, when I talk about the essay section, I'm going to get into like whether or not you should explain this, but keep in mind, again, most admissions officers will be very much aware of this. What we want to know is then, how did you take advantage of the time that you had? Did you kind of just sit around and do nothing? Did you feel like, well, my football practice is canceled, so I'm just not going to do anything. There's nothing for me to do. Did you just do absolutely nothing? Or did you take the initiative to at least do the things that you could? So some examples of this would be taking care of a sibling, even something as simple as helping your younger sister or younger brother with the classes or with the homework they have. Something as simple as that could be worth your while to talk about or to put onto your activities. Things like helping your parents around the house, or even maybe taking up a part-time job to help pay the bills. Did you get involved in online volunteering opportunities, which there were opportunities for? Did you get involved in online courses, even if they were free? There's free websites like edX and Coursera, where you can take online courses and get certifications in those. Did you do that? Did you get involved in independent projects? Some of my students have created YouTube channels, podcasts, websites. These projects are really awesome because anyone can do them. Did you get involved in virtual programs and internships? Did you partake in online competitions, again, of which there were still many? There were so many things, and there are still so many things that you can get involved in and that you can do. And if you're kind of just sitting around thinking, well, my school doesn't have clubs, so I'm not going to do anything. It's not my fault. I can't do anything. You're really wasting your time, because there's so many other opportunities for you to get involved and to show initiative to your colleges. At the end of the day, your activities should still be the following. And I really want to stress this first point, but one of the things that I guess I'm noticing a lot of students when I first work with them don't have is major related activities. If you want to go into political science, I want to see you getting involved in activities like youth and government, debate, model United Nations. If you're a bio major, or if you want to apply for accelerated medical programs in the future, I want to see you volunteering at hospitals or doing bio-related internships, getting involved in HOSA or future medical professionals. There are so many opportunities for you to pursue activities in your major, but this is a really important aspect of your applications. If you go in as a computer science major, but you don't have a lot of computer science activities, or if you apply to colleges as a history major, but all you have done was take history classes, you're not making a compelling enough case for colleges to want to accept you. So getting involved in major related activities is extremely important. In addition to that, your activities, even in the pandemic, need to demonstrate the following qualities. So we want to see dedication, right? Still, are you just volunteering once every few months at a homeless shelter? Or are you still taking the time every week to volunteer to help people with learning disabilities or to help people who are struggling with mental health conditions, right? We also want to see compassion, right? The fact that you're still working to help people, even though it's not necessarily required of you, and even though a lot of opportunities are not as available, especially in school, are you still demonstrating that you're trying to make an impact on the community around you? Then you have leadership. And again, this might be a little bit tougher if there's not as many opportunities for leadership in school, but you can show leadership in other ways. Again, spearheading your own volunteer workshop. You're spearheading your own volunteer experience to try to help other people, maybe even creating an organization and getting your friends to help you out. That could be a great way for you to demonstrate leadership. So don't think that, again, because there's no more clubs in school or it's limited, that there's just no way for you to demonstrate leadership to your colleges. We want to see passion. And again, a lot of that is through getting involved in major related activities. And we want to see uniqueness. I think doing anything, first of all, is better than nothing, right? So even if you're going to do something very simple, like writing cards to healthcare workers or volunteering to help clean the beach, to be honest, these are kind of vanilla activities. A lot of people do these things. But if you are able to take that next step beyond just kind of the basic things, but taking advantage of ways for you to make a more unique impact. For example, I had a student who was very interested. She's going in as a political science major, and she's also interested in climate justice. So what she did was she created workshops. She created her own curriculum to teach middle school kids about climate justice. And she also had them email their congressman, and she got them to actually get into a Zoom call with their congressman so they could talk about climate justice. It was really awesome. That to me is a much more unique activity that most people will not be doing. And those types of hooks are so important for colleges, right? We want to try moving beyond the very basic things that almost everyone does and try and find ways that you can fulfill a niche or to do something that will look a lot more impressive and different. Moving on to essays. So just broader advice for essays. And I think, all of this really applied even before the pandemic. There is one thing I will talk about that's pandemic specific in the next slide, but I want to make sure we're still clear about what we're expecting for your essays. So the first thing here is that your essays should be very personal, and they need to go beyond what I feel like a lot of Asian students and especially Asian parents kind of tell their kids to do, right? I have a lot of Asian parents, for example, like saying, why don't you write about, you making your club and how hard it was to make your club? Or why don't you talk about getting this award in this tournament and how hard it was for you to do that? Keep in mind that on your activities and awards page, you're going to write your awards. You're going to talk about your clubs already in that page. If your essays don't show us anything new, you're not fulfilling what this essay should be fulfilling. This essay is a squandered opportunity if it's just reiterating what we already know. So your essays are an opportunity for you to show us something different, right? Your essays are a way for us to understand context, right? How did you grow from your experience with Science Olympiad? What did you learn from your time in speech and debate? What was the insight that you got because you had to grow up with an autistic sibling? Right? The story that you're telling us, hopefully you have more unique stories. I do think that the more unique your idea is, obviously, the easier it's going to be for you to write a great essay. That doesn't mean that you can't write about more common topics. Like I've read so many piano essays, but some piano essays are really good, right? I've read so many students talk about a sport they play, but sometimes it can work. It's a lot harder to write amazing essays on very common topics, but it's still possible. And the most important thing that we want to see is the second point here. How did you demonstrate growth from your experience? So colleges really want to see students who are consistently pursuing their personal growth. They want to see how you've learned something, the insights you've gained, the explication, as one of my colleagues would call it. What you've learned from your experiences matters so much. That growth is a critical aspect of your college essays. Those insights matter. But we don't want to just see that you've grown and you are at the peak of your existence, right? If you were to tell us like through speech and debate, I'm now the most confident I'll ever be. And I'm one of the best public speakers. And if you just kind of tell us that you're at your peak, that's also problematic. The goal should also be for you to demonstrate that you still have room to grow. Absolutely. You guys are high school students. You absolutely still have more room to grow. No matter who you are, you have room to grow. And as a college admissions officer, I want to see that. I want to see that if I were to accept you, I can see how our school is going to help you to fulfill your potential and become an even better person than you are now. So while you want to demonstrate growth through your essays, you also want to demonstrate that you still have some room to grow. And then finally, you want to demonstrate impact and uniqueness from your essays. And I feel like, again, this is fairly obvious. We want to know what makes you different. I can't tell you how many essays I've read when I was reading applications for Yale or for Penn that were like, this was a huge challenge for me. And I had to work hard, work my butt off, demonstrate tenacity. And now I overcame that challenge. Right. I've read so many essays where students talk about things like adaptability, like learning to adapt, or the really popular topics like being bullied and having to overcome that, or coming from another country and being raised in America and having to, overcome a linguistic barrier. I've seen those so many times. And I want to make sure that within your essays, you're finding things about yourself, genuine aspects about yourself that you feel like really highlight something about you and demonstrate why you are a strong candidate for the colleges you're applying to. The part that's specific to COVID is the optional Covet section. And for colleges like the UCs or for other schools, you might do this in the additional information sections. What I want to make very clear, and I know I put this in the essay section, and that's because this is in the essay section technically when you're doing your common application, but this is not an extra essay in the sense that it's not a place for you to write an entire story, or for you to just tell us, to give us this huge narrative and like a sob story, a pity party about what you did. It's not an extra essay. It's really just a response. Some things you don't need to do. Like, I don't really need you to talk about how your school responded to COVID because your counselor is going to talk about that for you. So you don't need to explain like, oh, clubs were, I mentioned this earlier, but you don't have to talk about how clubs weren't existing. You don't have to talk about these things because again, your counselor will discuss this. What we're curious about are the following. And all of this is actually on the common application. They explain this. So when they mention like, well, what do you want to see in this COVID section? We want to see the following, right? Was there some sort of an illness? Did you lose someone in your family? Were there employment problems? Did someone in your family lose their job? For more low income families, did you deal with food insecurity? For anyone, did you deal with mental or emotional health problems? Were there new obligations you had to take on, like taking care of a sibling or having to help out around the house? Did you have problems with computer or internet access? Did you lack access to a safe and quiet study space? Or even things like, did you decide to change your major or did your career interests shift because of COVID? All of these things, again, literally the Common App mentions you can talk about these things, but these are the types of things that we want to see in your essay in this section. What this is not is a space for you to give us excuses, okay? It's not excuses if you have a legitimate reason, like, for example, lacking computer or internet access or losing someone in your family. But if there hasn't been a super challenging problem that you faced because of COVID and you got a B or a C in your class, this is not a space for you to say, oh, I got a C in my first semester of junior year because of COVID. It was just really hard. I was so distracted. If there's no reason for you to be saying this, you're actually putting a spotlight on something you should not be putting a spotlight on. So I recommend actually that when you talk about things like your grades, you only do so here if you have a very good reason or a very solid explanation. Otherwise, it could actually end up hurting your application because it'll make it sound like you're giving an excuse. You also are not writing a pity party sob story, right? You're not just talking about how it was so terrible, how it was so hard to balance all of your classes and try to find activities to do. It's not about trying to make the admissions officer feel bad for you. If you were not significantly impacted by the pandemic, then what you should be doing in your application is focus less on trying to provide excuses and instead focus on your achievements, right? Assume that we already know that you probably couldn't get involved in as many of your school activities. So instead, spend your time explaining what you were able to do, right? What initiative did you demonstrate? And that's the focus of what your application should be. Okay, courses and grades. Number 4, more than in previous years, especially for colleges like the UCs, grades are going to matter more. So for those of you with good grades, that's awesome. For those of you who are struggling in your classes, yikes, that might hurt you a bit, right? Grades were always really the number one thing that colleges paid the most attention to, right? And also how hard your courses were, which I'll talk about in a few moments. However, now that for some colleges like the UCs, they're completely test blind, and with test optional schools, grades matter more than ever before. And so when I tell my students that your number one priority is always making sure that you have good grades, I'm not saying that lightly. Now, I'm not saying that having 1 B or 2 Bs, especially early in your high school career, is going to kill your chances of acceptance. Of course, you can still get accepted to a great college, even if you have like 1 or 2 Bs, if it's not that bad. But if you have a lot of Bs and Cs, and especially if they're more so in the latter half of your high school career, if you have Bs and Cs in your second semester, sophomore year, junior year, if there's a lot of inconsistency in your grades, unfortunately, that could be problematic. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you can't get into a good college, but it absolutely makes things tougher. And you absolutely need to demonstrate strengths in all other areas of your application. So you have problems with your grades, you better have really great test scores, amazing activities and leadership, amazing recommendations, amazing essays. You have to make up for that discrepancy or those problems, those deficiencies in your grades if you have poor ones. In addition to your grades, though, your courses matter, right? You can get easy straight A's, but if you're taking the easiest classes in your high school, you're not making a compelling case for colleges. Your courses have to be rigorous. You need to be showing to colleges that you're challenging yourself to take the hardest classes possible. And I'm not going to make you do this. Don't take all the APs and IBs if you're going to get Bs and Cs in your classes, right? But I still want you to challenge yourself because, again, this matters. In addition, your courses should try to be more major focused. If you are, for example, going into computer science or another STEM major, I want to see you excelling and taking harder STEM courses. And then I also want to see you demonstrating an upwards progression throughout high school in terms of your rigor of your courses. So for example, in freshman year, you might have taken 0 APs. Maybe your high school didn't let you take any APs. By sophomore year, maybe you now took 1 AP. And then by junior year, you took 4 APs. And then by senior year, you took 5. I want to see, and hopefully you're getting good grades in these classes, but I want to see you taking harder and harder courses. I want to see that you're continuing to challenge yourself to take these classes. And the only way to do that is by demonstrating that upwards progression in the level of rigor. There is something unique that I wanted to point out because I know this is a really, really recent change. And if you guys weren't already aware of this, unfortunately, some of these deadlines for your schools might have passed. But there was a bill passed by the California State Legislature, and it was called AB 104. And essentially what they said was you can, for this past school year, change any of your grades or all of your grades to pass, no pass, instead of keeping your letter grade. So obviously, if you guys have straight A's, you don't have to worry about this. But for some students who might have had a few B's or even C's in their classes, this might be a viable option for you. Once again, unfortunately, I think a few deadlines have passed. Like for some Irvine high schools, the deadline to submit this pass, no pass registration was a few days ago. But I think it depends on the high school that you are in. So if you can still change to pass, no pass, should you? This is a question that I saw from a few of my students. Well, it kind of depends, unfortunately. There's no easy answers here, and a lot of this will depend on what your grades are looking like. But there's a few rules of thumb that I can give you. You should go pass, no pass, or pass, fail for just the classes, or you shouldn't just do it for the few classes that you got B's or C's in. So if you have like 5 A's and 2 B's, it would be weird and suspicious for you to just do pass, fail for the 2 B's. Right? If necessary, you should really just do it for the entire semester or for the entire year. So rule of thumb, you can ask yourself, what's going to raise my GPA more? If I go pass fail, that doesn't affect your GPA whatsoever. So all of your grades from junior year are nil. It doesn't affect your GPA. But if you don't go pass fail, then the B's and C's might bring down your GPA. So you might want to ask yourself, should you still go pass fail? Well, figure out how your GPA changes depending on whether or not you do so. You also want to see the trends in your grades. If you have like straight A's in freshman year and straight A sophomore year, but then you got a few B's, maybe some C's in junior year, it might actually be better for you to go pass fail for the whole year. But if you were really struggling in freshman year, you did a little better sophomore year and you did a little better junior year, but you still had a few B's, for example, it might be better to keep your grades if it shows that you're still doing better every single year. All right. So for those of you where this applies, think about it. Again, it's very situational. The last thing I want to talk about within these last few minutes, demonstrated interest. And I really want to point this out because right now, especially for my current rising seniors, there's ways that you can demonstrate interest that can matter. So just really quickly, what is demonstrated interest? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Are you demonstrating interest in your colleges? And there's a few ways to do so. When you write your college essays, some schools will ask you, why do you want to come here? And if you have a lot of research about the school, you show off your knowledge of the school, you demonstrate why you're a good fit there. That's one way that we can detect demonstrated interest. If you apply early decision, that can demonstrate interest. Early decision, if you don't already know, if you apply early decision to a college and you get accepted, you have to go. So you show a lot of commitment to that college, and that's another very popular way to demonstrate interest. For your information, not every college really tracks this. Many schools do not, especially public schools. They don't really track demonstrated interest, but some private schools like UPenn, absolutely, we tracked demonstrated interest. For example, when I was reading through applications, we can see in your file, not only if you did like an info session, which I'll talk about next, but also when you did that info session and how many info sessions you did. And doing these things can demonstrate interest as well. So some things that you guys can do now that I always would recommend. Number one, definitely getting on the mailing list for your colleges. Some schools not only can see if you're on the mailing list, but actually they can see your click rate. And I know that's a little dystopian almost, but some schools can actually see like how much you click on their emails. I don't think that'll make a big change in your chance of admissions, to be quite honest. I don't think any admissions officer is going that deeply into your application to see like how many times did he click on our emails. But at the end of the day, they can track it. And it's just a good way for you to learn about the college and for you to get be one of the first people to get new information from these schools. So I always recommend you join the mailing list for your colleges. Because of COVID, there's been this huge online infrastructure that was created for a lot of these colleges. So schools have developed these means for virtual info sessions and college tours that if you're not taking advantage of them is a really wasted opportunity. And like I said, at UPenn, for example, we can see if you've taken advantage of these things, and we want to make sure that you are. Some colleges are offering opportunities for you to sign up for interviews now. So for example, Pitzer, Pomona College, Claremont McKenna, some schools like College of William and Mary, Case Western Reserve, these colleges let you sign up for interviews now. And if you can do it and you do it well, it can really improve your chance of acceptance. And then finally, I would recommend that you also contact your regional advisor. A lot of people might not know this, but a lot of times the way admissions works for the bigger colleges is they have regional advisors all over the United States. You can contact them. You can talk with them. You can ask them questions, ask them for information, and formulating these relationships can be really useful. Okay, that's all the time that I have here. But if you guys want to check us out, feel free to take a picture of this QR code, sign up for a free consultation from us. You can meet one of our counselors and we can answer any of your questions if you would like. I don't know. I guess I have time for one question. Hi, I'm a junior and I'm interested in economics. If I didn't do much last summer and this summer because of COVID, is there anything I could do next summer to make up? Yes, absolutely. I mean, not even just next summer, but I would say over this coming school year, getting involved in economics related activities, taking advantage of economics related like courses online. I talked about edX and Coursera before. And also there's a ton of economic summer programs and internships that you can take advantage of. It's not too late, but you really got to start making up for lost ground now. All right. Okay, I think that's all the time I have for questions, unfortunately, but thank you guys for checking me out, and I will see you guys later.